Now, I'd love to get your views on, CoreLogic just released its report around the gap between house and unit values, and there's that increase for housing, and that's historically been the case, right? And we talked about it at the top of the show. But my question to you is, do you feel like we might have reached a pivot point where that gap could start to narrow, largely around the fact that we do have more people, if we speak to the true demand for property in a lot of areas, not having they have the intent to buy, but not the capacity. So therefore, they're going to have to make a decision to either go much further out past the commuter belt to be able to afford a house, or they're going to make a decision to go, all right, well, I've got established friends and networks and cultures and activities and metropolises that I want to be around. Um, are we at a pivot point, or is it just the same as going forward? We'll just experience a bit of the same, where that gap between house and unit values will continue.
That's a great question. I feel like my thoughts around apartments for owner occupiers in particular is that it's kind of a question of almost like an acquiescence to living in a unit, because the benefits of owning your own home as well as having more space, having a garden, is the fact that from a kind of logical investment perspective, um, detached house and land is more precious and will only become more precious over time through population growth. The premium on houses over units has blown out massively since COVID. And I think that there's a lot of long-term factors that influence the premium on detached houses, but in the shorter term factors, I think it is that normalization of remote work. It's the movement to areas out from cities. Even net migration to regional Australia is still relatively elevated where it was pre-COVID, and we know that a lot of regional areas have more house stock, so that influences it as well. But just to give you some perspective, the pre-COVID 5-year average of the difference between the median unit and house value across the capital cities is 17%. It's now sitting at 45%. So I don't see that premium being eroded anytime soon, even amid affordability constraints. Um, and the acquiescence of first home buyers to the unit segment has been pretty slow over time. If you look at ABS housing and occupancy data, they point to about 12% of recent home purchases being in the unit sector back in 2009, 2010. Fast forward 10 years, and that data is showing an uplift to only 17%. So it will happen, but it will happen very slowly. And I think people will probably first and foremost look to getting their own house and land over time where they can afford it. But, as we discussed in my own personal circumstance, I think for some people, the unit will work and it will be the more viable option. I think in short, like, yes, I agree, but I think it'll just happen slowly that we'll see more of an uptake in the unit sector.
So there's kind of a segment too, because clear as you point, like the Nirvana is a detached house, and in a premium location, that's still the Nirvana. But it feel like there's just this sub-million decision that a lot of millennials will need to face, and they'll need to go, right. Do I actually want to spend this limited fixed amount of money, and do I want to go further out to get a house, or do I want to stay in closer? And I feel like that's what I'm wrestling with in my head around that particular segment. Call it sort of 450 to 800. Where would they rather be? Would they rather be in a medium density, a slightly more medium density place in the middle of Brizzy, or do they want to go further out that has a commute and further away from their lifestyle? So it's there's always going to be that divide for obvious reasons. It's just whether or not there's this pivot point decision for people. Because I've had a conversation with one of the younger crew in our, because Ben and I are dinosaurs, right? So I talked to the younger crew in the office, and she's like, I still want to stay. I still want to stay in this suburb. I'm just going to have to make a decision about the size of, effectively the size of the land. They go from a house to a townhouse to a unit to an apartment or whatever. I'm just going to have to make a decision on that because I don't want to move further out. So I think it's just that little segment sub 1 million where that decision will start to become difficult for people. Not difficult, but challenging for them. Which
Yeah.
one do I choose, the red or the blue?
I think it's a good question to investigate. If you look at capital growth rates alone, say since the start of the pandemic, where we've seen the blowout between houses and units, Melbourne unit values have only increased 3% between March 2020 and January 2024. House values, 14%. Similar in Sydney, house values are up about 25%, unit values are up 8%. There are some unit markets that have not moved in value for around 5 years. High density markets like Parramatta or pockets of the inner southwest. And I guess what I'm getting at is the units are there. It's just that they're not always in that high
Mm.
demand. And I think if we were seeing more of an uptake of relatively affordable dwellings, that would be reflected in demand and that would be reflected in growth rates.